Thank you so much for joining us today for part of our speaker series for the Peter and Rosemary Casey Fellow. Today we're joined by Kira Snyder. Kira is an Emmy Award and WGA award-winning writer and co-executive producer on the TV show The Handmaid's Tale for Hulu. Her other film and television work includes the movie Pacific Rim Uprising, pilot scripts for Hulu, FX, and Amazon The 100 on the CW, Incursion for Stars, Sci-Fi's Eureka and Alphas, and the CBS vampire cult hit Moonlight. Kira is a graduate of the Writers Guild of America's Showrunner Training Program and the Warner Brothers Television Writers Workshop. Kira's interactive young adult supernatural mystery series, The Parish Mail ebooks, are available for Kindle. Formerly a game designer, Kira has created games for Microsoft, the MIT Press textbook Rules of Play, and Electronic Arts, including the seminal alternate reality game Majestic. Kira, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're really excited for you to join us at SF State. So can we just start by you talking a little bit about your career path, kind of what has led you to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm kind of on my third career, if you're depending on how you're counting. I was a drama major in college, focused on playwriting. And I did that for a while, various regional theaters around the U.S., learning that it's very hard to make a living as a playwright, not exactly rocket science. But at the same time I was doing theater, I was also, I've always been a gamer, not so much these days, but certainly when I was younger, played a lot of computer games. And I got involved in designing them, developing them. And that took me a left turn into technology. It's always left turn into technology, and I ended up going to graduate school for that. So I got my master's in interactive telecommunications and worked in the game industry for about 10 years. I worked in Silicon Valley. I worked at Electronic Arts just down the peninsula here. Worked at Microsoft. And the games I really loved to do were kind of world-building games that were very narrative or involved kind of just creation of a fictional space. And then the last game job I had was not that kind of game. It was much more of a little kind of casual games. Like I was working for Yahoo, and it was it was a fine enough company to work for, but the games weren't the things I really liked to do. They weren't story-driven. So that was the job that moved me down to Los Angeles, and so I started to think about making a change, getting back to dramatic writing. And so in LA, there are a number of programs that are, they're kind of feeder programs into screenwriting, more specifically to the television industry. So a lot of the studios and networks have these programs that, if you get into them, they're very competitive, but if you get into them, you very often will get a job on a show. And that's what happened with me. So I was working for Yahoo, and I applied to a program called the Warner Brothers Writers Workshop. And that was a program that the idea is to train people to become TV writers for Warner Brothers TV shows, and that's what happened. So I got into that. I got staffed on my first show out of that program, gave Yahoo 2 weeks notice, and then that has been my focus ever since.
Awesome. So what would you say are some of the important elements for students to understand when they are considering writing for television?
So TV writing, I love. I've written lots of different types of things. One of the things about TV writing, which is unique, is it's a mix of collaborative and independent creation. So every show operates a little bit differently, but our show and most TV shows have what's called a writer's room or a writing staff, where we all work on breaking each episode beat by beat, figuring out what the episode's going to be together as a staff. So you are in a conference room with whiteboards or bulletin boards, and you are together as a staff of anywhere between 8 and a dozen people, figuring out what's going to be on the screen for a given episode. But then what happens, if it's your episode, you take that story that you all worked on together, and then you go off and write your script. So it's a mix of working collaboratively and independently, which I really just love. The times that I've been writing things just for myself, either an original pilot or the movie work I've done, it gets a little lonely, and I miss having other people to bounce ideas off of. So that collaborative aspect is great. So if you're the kind of person who's interested in writing and you're not so much of a team player, because obviously it's a very team-oriented kind of collaboration. If that's not your jam, then maybe TV writing is not the right kind of gig for you. The other thing about TV writing specifically, and it's actually true of screenwriting as well, is that you need to find the balance between caring about your writing and then learning to let go, because you get rewritten a tremendous amount. You get notes from everybody, from your coworkers to your boss, to the actors, to the director, to the studio. So you're constantly revising your own work. So being able to be invested in it and do your best work, but also know when to kind of step back and let your ego go and understand that it is a collaboration, not just amongst the writers, but amongst everybody involved in the production. That, again, is something that can be a bit of an interesting lesson for someone who's new to the business.
So as I mentioned in the beginning, you're a producer and writer for The Handmaid's Tale. I'm sure we have several fans in the room. But when you have both of those roles, can you talk a little bit about what the process is and how it might differ as a producer versus a writer when you're working on a series like that?
So some of you may be aware, the way TV staffs are structured is it's loosely a hierarchy based on experience. So you start in as a staff writer, and then you kind of work your way up the ladder. Each of those rungs has a different title, and at a certain point, producer gets attached to your title. So you are a staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, co-producer, producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, and executive producer. That's what I am. I'm an executive producer. So once you start having producer attached to your title, that's when, generally speaking, you are expected to engage more in being a producer on your show. So some shows, the showrunner, the boss, the head executive producer, really treats the show like a teaching hospital. Like, the idea is that you have a staff of a lot of different range of experiences, but you're training people to become more advanced. You're training them to actually do your job eventually. So you're not actually expected to do that work until you kind of officially get that producer title. And then that's when the boss or the senior staff will start bringing you in and having you be involved in pre-production meetings. You might go to set. You might be involved in post. You might be involved in mentoring younger writers, and those are all parts of being a producer. So you get that skill and knowledge as you kind of move through the business. And how it comes down to writing is when you have to juggle kind of the writing part of what you want to do versus the producer part of what you want to do, because the writer is going to write something crazy and amazing and expensive and unproducible, and the producer person's like, no, we can't do that. So like, I have this great set piece that's set on a train and there's going to be explosions, and the producer's like, can you put it in a restaurant? So the writers who are more adept at that will kind of pre-anticipate those questions, and you don't want to hem yourself in too much. You want to kind of keep free rein to your creativity and tell the best story. But you're not writing something that you're writing something that's going to get made, and so you need to have somewhere in the back of your brain, like, okay, how would I really do this? We can't afford 500 horses. Maybe one horse. That kind of thing.
So for those who may not be familiar with The Handmaid's Tale, can you just give a little bit of context of what the premise of the show is?
Those of you who know the show, it's like...
How do we condense this? Yeah.
So it is based on an amazing novel by Margaret Atwood, which came out in 1985. And the novel is set in the future. The show, it's kind of fun because the book is set in the future, but the show kind of takes place in our present. And it actually still kind of meshes out, because a lot of things she was talking about in terms of technology are things that we have now. So it is about a world where a group of religious extremists, a theocracy, has taken over the U.S. They basically have destroyed the American government and taken over and put in place a very brutal theocratic regime, which specifically is subjugating women. So they have completely reinvented society, and women who are, and part of the reason they've done this is because in the world of the book and the show, there's a fertility crisis. Like the birth rates have completely plummeted. And so this group, who's called the Sons of Jacob, their solution to this was not look to science or environmental things necessarily, but basically just to round up all the fertile women of childbearing age and turn them into breeders for the elites of the society. So if you are a married woman of faith, you get to be an econo woman, which means you kind of keep your own family unit. But if you are considered a sinful woman, If you are able to bear children, you become a handmaid, which means you become basically a sex and breeding slave for a rich family. And if you're not able to bear children and you're a woman of sin, you become a Martha. It's another one of the castes, and they are the laborers, the house laborers who do the cooking and the cleaning. So it's a world where women have no rights. Even the elite women also have no rights. So some of the characters in the novel, in the show, are the elite women, but they find out women cannot read. You get punished. You lose a finger if you're caught reading, and so there's a lot of those very brutal kind of Old Testament biblical punishments that are in this world, and something that we really try to make sure that we depict. The show is anti-extremist. It's not anti-religion. A lot of our characters, and this is true in the book as well, have a great deal of personal spiritual faith. But what we show on the program is what happens when faith is perverted by people who really just want power. So it's really about power dynamics, about survival in this brutal society. And our lead character is the handmaid of the Handmaid's Tale, and her struggle to survive and kind of keep her sanity even as she's trying to make her way in this world.
So as you mentioned, the show was originally based on a book that was published in the 80s. What is the process of taking something like a book and adapting that to a TV series?
It's been a really interesting creative process. So I've been on the show since the beginning. And if you've seen the show, the events of the book largely follow the events of the show, the first season, are based on the events of the book. So we definitely moved beyond the book pretty early. So in terms of the project getting picked up to be made, this particular book has been a lot of things. It was a movie in the 90s. It's been a ballet. It's been a graphic novel. It's been an opera. I mean, it's been adapted.
That's
quite
some
a
fun.
bit. Yeah, it's been adapted quite a bit. So it had been kicking around as a possible TV show for a while, and then when I came on is when it actually finally kind of got traction. So it just so happened that we started working on the show in 2016. It was before the primary, certainly before the election, and it just so happened that this book that was always very timely continues to be timely.
Well, I think that, when you talk about the timing of everything, do you think some of the themes that were originally in this book, several decades ago, and now are in the show, do you think it resonates with what is going on in society today at all?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it's a book that has always been, it's never been out of print since the 80s, and unfortunately, because some of the issues that it deals with continue to be relevant. It's never been irrelevant. The book has always been very timely. And it just so happens that now, we're seeing a time as the rise of, the far right, the rise of religious extremism kind of worldwide, women's rights, the rights of other marginalized groups are under attack. It does feel kind of more relevant now than ever. And this is not something that we anticipated. I mean, many of us working on the show thought that we would be coming out under a very different political moment when the show came out. Could have had a different president, and then the show would have been this kind of fairly absurd cautionary tale of like, this could never happen in America. That's not what happened. Things went in a different direction, and the show, in a way we could not have anticipated, turned out to be rather too relevant. So it's not a show where, it's not a rip from the headline show, like we don't look at the newspaper. Some shows do that. They look at the newspaper and say, we want to tell a story about this. Really what we're doing is following June's story and the story of our characters. It just so happens that the world she lives in and the policies and the points of view that are depicted by the people in power, unfortunately, are shared by people in our own world.
So back to kind of talking about writing and producing, if you look at something like The Handmaid's Tale, you'll have episodes that are written by different people. So what is that like when you are putting together a season, but yet you have different episodes written by different people? How does that process work?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's something that every show handles a little bit differently. I know some shows, if the episode is like really action heavy, they might give it to a particular writer on staff who loves to write action, or something, or an episode is really heavy on romance. Maybe the person who is really into character stuff will do that one. Sometimes script assignments are made based on seniority. So you start with the more senior writer, and then 2, 3, 4, all the way down the line to the least senior person. On our show, and it's the boss makes the decision. The showrunner makes the decision on how to do that. So for our showrunner, for Bruce Miller, he looks at a couple different things when doing that. It's a lot of different factors. It's actually a lot less content on our show than some shows are. Sometimes it works out that way. Like I've written a couple episodes that were a little more actiony. I personally love sci-fi and action adventure, so I don't mind writing action sequences. Some people on our show just do not like those at all. I'm like, I like that stuff.
Do you have a favorite episode that you have written?
I think Holly, which I co-wrote with Bruce, which was episode 211. It's the one where she gives birth in this kind of weird, spooky, abandoned summer lake house. That's probably my favorite of the ones that I've worked on. It's such a tour de force for Elizabeth Moss, but that's probably my favorite. I like them all. There's things to love about all of the episodes.
Each of them. If you think about writing and producing, what are some of those challenges, but also rewards that you get being in this industry and doing that?
One of the great things about working in TV, and I've worked some in features as well, is that in TV, you actually make the show. Like often you will write a script for a movie and it will never get made. Like either the deal falls apart or doesn't get released. I mean, I know people who have had really successful careers in Hollywood for like 20 years and nothing of theirs has actually made it to the screen, which that's not why any of us want to do this. We all want to make stuff to be seen. So TV, you could write something and a couple weeks, couple months later, it'll be on the air, or they'll be filming it, and very quickly after that, it'll be on the air. So it's the reward there is you're going to write something that someone like I'm working on a script now, and it'll be shooting in April, and then hopefully you'll see it by the end of this coming year. So actually getting stuff in production is great. And the challenges, and that comes with challenges. So talking about the producer hat versus the writer hat.
Yeah.
There's never enough time. There's never enough money. It doesn't matter how big or how small your show is. You're always fighting the schedule and you're always fighting the budget. We try really hard not to be ridiculous when we're writing our scripts, but you don't know until you have the line producer break it down and figure out the budget. Like, hey, guess what? This episode is 3 days over. We need to find something to cut. And that's where the kind of problem-solving writing comes in, because you have to figure out, like, okay, so how do I cut 3 days out of this episode, which is like, is that an entire storyline? Is it an entire location? Is it an entire character? And the later in the process that happens, the harder it gets, the more expensive it gets. So if you've actually, cast a role that you end up cutting later, that's kind of a hassle. It's a hard call to make to that poor actor.
So we've talked a lot about The Handmaid's Tale so far. Do you have a favorite project other than that you really enjoyed working on, and what made it so enjoyable?
So the show, I've been very fortunate in that the shows that I've worked on are shows that I either was a fan of before I started working on it, or like it was a show coming up that I really liked. So the show that well, gosh, that's hard to say. So I liked Eureka a lot. Eureka was on the Sci-Fi Channel, and it was a really kind of fun, light sci-fi dramedy about a small town full of geniuses. So it had a kind of a quirky, kind of picket fences kind of vibe to it. But I think probably my other favorite project recently was the show right before Handmaid's Tale, which is called The 100. It was on the CW. And it was just this really fun post-apocalyptic show that you're like, oh, okay, teens living in post-apocalyptic Earth on the CW. It's going to be glossy and sexy and funny. And actually, it was dark. It was really fun because it was a very morally gray. It was more like Lord of the Flies than anything else. So yeah, you have these teenagers that crash land in a post-nuclear Earth, and it does not go well. It's really bumpy, and we got to play with these really kind of cool, morally gray questions in a way that. On network TV, you don't actually get to do that very often. I mean, all credit to the CW for saying, yes, tell us, give us these weird, morally ambiguous, ethical dilemma type stories in a really interesting kind of dystopia Earth thing. So that was really a lot of fun to work on.
So we have several people here who are interested in getting into writing or producing. What are some tips that you would have for students that are aspiring to do what you're doing?
So I mentioned a couple things earlier in terms of working collaboratively, if you have whether it's like putting on a theatrical production or making a webisode, like the more practice you have working with other people and other personalities, that will be really useful to you in the future. Any kind of collaborative creative project, I think, kind of fits that bill. Learning how to take feedback, notes from teachers, from coworkers. As I mentioned before, it's a kind of writing where you need to kind of like, you don't need to check your ego at the door. You just need to know when to let go and when to dig in. When you get to be the showrunner, then you get to set the rules. You get to give the notes. The other things also is sort of the good news and the bad news about getting into this industry is that there's no one way to do it. Mm-hmm. So that's the bad news because there's no set path that you can follow that'll get you there. But it's also the good news because there's no one way to do it. There's lots of ways to do it, especially now, especially programs like this. If you have the ability to like make your own stuff, like to make a webisode, to do a fictional podcast, even like podcasting is really blowing up as a way. A fictional podcast is blowing up a way where people are looking for content now. You can kind of practice your craft and get out there and get stuff made and get a name for yourself. Without ever having to, be in LA, and that will need to happen eventually. But like, you can actually get a lot of work done in terms of developing your voice as a writer and your skills as a producer before you even kind of make that big step. So going out and making your own stuff, I think, is great. Focusing, if you're for writers specifically, write a lot. That seems a little obvious, but write things, finish things, get notes on things, revise things, and then move on. Something that happens a lot with emerging writers is either they have one thing that they kind of work on and polish, but that's the only thing they have, and so they don't have many samples, and that one thing tends to get overworked, or they write a million things and none of them are quite polished. So you kind of want to be in the middle. So as you're putting your portfolio together, and this is kind of down the road, but you want to have a handful of really good samples, but you want to have more than one and less than 50 or whatever. Because I know some writers who are like they really pride themselves on writing a lot of things very quickly, but the problem is the writing comes in the rewriting. You probably hear this from your teachers a lot, but that learning how to rewrite and knowing how to kind of problem solve something creatively, like that is so much a part of being a screenwriter. Like you're constantly rewriting. Like I did not know that when I got into this. Like the thing will be shot and be writing additional dialogue to put over on someone's back. When you're editing, you're still rewriting even up until pretty much it airs.
I think we are going to get some questions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions?
Did I solve it?
You want me to keep asking them? Okay. So we're just going to figure out who we.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we have a mic that needs to come over to you.
Oh, really? It's coming.
Yes. It is on its way. There we go.
Thanks. Hi. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you for showing up.
Yeah, thank you for coming to San Francisco. What's the difference, like, making yourself available as being a producer? Like, how much does that detract from your writing daily?
So in TV, the jobs are pretty much intertwined, actually. So it's there's a big difference between television and features, and I imagine other things as well. Like in features, there's a lot more kind of teasing apart of those roles. The writer kind of just writes, and then producers do various things from putting the financing together to handling physical production. But in television, the jobs are pretty knit together. Where you see the separation is when you're trying to kind of, as I mentioned before, trying to get the writer part of you to make sure something is producible. But it's it's kind of the one job. So when you're watching a TV show and the credits at the beginning have like, it says co-producer and executive producer and co-executive producer. All those people are writers. They're also responsible for the creative vision of the show, and they might do things that are more typically producerial, like be on set, or weigh in on post, but they're really kind of a piece, much more so than they are with features.
Do we have another question? Following the microphone. We'll work our way to this side next.
Hi, you were telling us that there's levels to being a producer or writer, and I was curious, what how does that get determined? Like, is it the amount of work you've done? Is it like if you do one successful project, you instantly jump up levels? How does that?
Yeah. It's a good question. It really kind of depends on the person, the situation. So very, very typically, if you you start at the bottom and then kind of work your way up. So that's what happened with me. Like my first job, I was a staff writer, and I kind of went up rung by rung. There are times when you might actually skip some steps. So for instance, this happens very commonly if someone comes in from another industry. So if you are, say you're a successful movie writer and you want to get into TV and you sell a pilot, you might come in as executive producer actually, but you typically will skip those lower rungs if you come in at that level. So basically what they're looking for very generally is a body of experience, and that can translate over from a different industry. And then, but more specifically, it's part of what's negotiated with your contract. So, you know, your lawyer, whomever is figuring out your deal with the studio will say, hey, you know, my client after one season wants the bump up to the next title. Or sometimes if you push for it, I know people who have skipped 2 rungs from season to season, which is usually an indication of how important they are to the show. So it's pretty individual, but you actually can, like I said, come in at a different level if you're coming in from another industry where you have a body of work. Mm-hmm.
What other questions do we have?
Hi. Yeah.
So I want to kind of touch back on when you mentioned problem-solving writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a news producer, and you spend a lot of time crafting your rundown, and then it airs, and things don't always go according to plan.
Yep.
So I'm curious, in your world, you guys spend your time in pre-production creating your script. You take it to set, and then say the actor is like, nope, or it's just not really going exactly as how you intended it to. Are writers on standby, like while the show is being made like that, to jump in and be like, okay, this script is not working, or this line isn't working, now we have to change some stuff around? So what's that process?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and that absolutely does happen all the time. So ideally, you do have a writer on set. It generally works best if the writer is kind of covering set, we call it. If the writer's covering set for their own episode, just because they know that script better than anybody else. Even though all writers, because it is collaboratively created, all the writers know all the episodes really well. So you can cover someone else's episode if need be. Not every show has someone on set to be able to do that, because that absolutely happens. So sometimes an actor will have an issue with a line or a question, or sometimes you'll inadvertently write a tongue twister for somebody, like, I literally cannot say these words you've written down for me, and you have to kind of fix it in the moment. So having someone like literally on standby with a laptop at the edge of the set to make those changes happens. Production rewrites happen all the time. So sometimes, like for instance, I mentioned before, like the schedule's too tight and the script just needs to be shorter, it needs to be straight up shorter. So that has to happen. So you have to somehow pull 5 pages out of your script somehow. And it was so beautifully crafted, but no, you have to get rid of it. Or they lose a location. So you have a location that you have 4 scenes in location. You got to rewrite those scenes for another location. Or an actor is suddenly not available. You got to write that person out of those scenes. And that's something that no one teaches you. No one teaches you that. I always thought a great writing exercise would be take your perfectly crafted script and then find a location you go to 4 times and you can't do that anymore. You have to rewrite that. So that's something you learn very much on the job. And the other thing that's tricky about those is those happen typically very quickly. You have to turn around a change like that, sometimes in a matter of hours, or for the next day, hey, it's raining. We can't be at this outlet side location. We have this other location. We need the scripts rewritten and distributed by 6 a.m. the next day. That can be a little hairy, but that happens all the time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that question.
This is kind of a more fun question, but if you could write for any other show on TV, what show would you want to write for?
Oh, that's a hard one. There's so much good stuff right now. Well, it's interesting because there's shows that I watch that I think personally I would not be any good on, just because they're not so much in my wheelhouse. I love Succession, but I think I would be terrible on that show. Just things that are purely character. I kind of like more incident myself. Explosions, aliens, ideally. We don't have so many of those on Handmaids. I love Game of Thrones. I would have loved to have written on Game of Thrones. That would have been a lot of fun. But yeah, personally I like big world building shows, and I think Handmaid's Tale qualifies because you have this really messed up but really interesting landscape, genre landscape that Margaret Atwood's created, and we're able to kind of explore that. So I like being taken to an interesting place. So the shows that I kind of gravitate towards are ones where I feel like I'm being transported. So now's really a great time for that kind of TV. Is actually any kind of TV, because there are a lot of those kind of shows that are out there right now.
I think we have a question over here.
To go off of that, working on a show that has like such an important political and societal message, do you kind of feel the weight and the importance of sharing those stories, especially working in like a male-dominated field? And do you find yourself kind of fighting to show like what you deem is important or should be shared?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a really good question. I mean, our show. Another way in which I've been very fortunate is that most of the shows I've worked on, and this is very unusual, have been half women or more, 50% women or more, and that's shockingly unusual. And I've worked for less unusually. I've only worked for, as a showrunner, I've had 3 female bosses in 12 years. That's a little more, unfortunately, standard. But having a writer's room that has like a diversity of voices, I think that really just makes the show better. So in terms of showing what we want to show, on this show is less of an issue. Part of it is just the nature of what the program is. Part of it is the showrunner, Bruce Miller. He really wants those stories told in an authentic way, which is why he hires voices that are not his. He's a straight white guy, and he doesn't want a staff that's just that. He wants a variety of people because it makes the show better. Also, our creative partners at MGM and Hulu are very supportive. So I don't think they've actually ever really, not want us to do things. They're really encouraging. And then in terms of responsibility, we take that responsibility very seriously. I mean, we take our responsibility to the original book very seriously, as well as kind of what we're doing. And one of the things that Margaret Atwood did in the book, which we absolutely do on the show, is that she took great care to make sure that everything in the book was based in reality. It's either everything she wrote about either happened in the past or was happening in real life at that moment. And that's true for us as well. Like, we don't need to, unfortunately, invent terrible laws and nasty cruelties because they're out there. So what we try to do is, firstly, not be gratuitous or exploitative. And the other thing we really try to do is ground it in as much research as possible. So we talk with the United Nations and people from different United Nations groups probably once every couple of weeks or so. They've been wonderful creative partners. We talk to human rights organizations. We talk to doctors. We talk to midwives. We talk to rape survivor groups. And we really try to make sure we have everything as authentic as possible because we do take that stuff very seriously. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have a question over here.
Hi.
Hi.
So you gave us what aspects that the studios look for in writers and producers, but as a producer, what aspects do you look for in actors?
Oh, and actors. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so one of the things as a producer that you do in TV and I'm sure in features as well is we're definitely involved in casting. So you start thinking about that stuff when you're writing the script. Very often we are asked to write the casting breakdowns for the roles. And then they're involved in pre-production, so we'll speak with the casting director saying, hey, for this role, we're looking for this kind of person. If it's a larger role that we might have a name behind, you might kind of toss around some like, oh, it's a Cherry Jones type, or actually Cherry Jones, as the case may be. So we're involved in those conversations early on. And then once you're into casting, we look at all the tapes. We don't cast in person so much. I mean, for a really important role, we might do in-person casting. So if people watch the show, the character Eden, who was this young woman who came on in season 2, 3, lose track of time. But she's someone that we cast in person, just because that was a really important role. Otherwise, actors cast on tape, and we watch all those tapes. And then, so basically, we're just looking for that. We're looking for someone who kind of embodies the role. And audition tapes are really tricky. I mean, as I'm sure y'all know, it's hard to tell sometimes from an audition tape if they're going to bring what is required to the role. But we do that, and we also kind of check references. Like if it's especially going to be someone who's going to be recurring, our casting directors who are amazing, they know a lot of people in the industry, and they're like, oh hey, this person's. I mean, they will not send us someone to look at who's not good to work with. But if it's someone who's going to be like a recurring character, regular character, well, we'll get a sense of how they're going to kind of fit into the culture of the show, because it's a really positive culture on the show, so we want to make sure everyone who kind of comes to be with us is in that way. Like so, and we've been amazingly fortunate. Like Bradley Whitford's been an amazing addition to the cast because he clicked immediately. He just was part of the family right off the bat. So we're looking at a lot of different factors, but really it's just kind of are they right for the role is really the main thing we're looking at. Hi.
Hello. I am super impressed with everything you've done, and
thanks.
Especially the 100, because that was a show that when I watched it, I was a little appalled by the acting, but the writing completely saved it.
Thank you.
I watched it, the concepts in it were so excellent.
Thanks.
But what I want to know is, just since you are predominantly a science fiction writer, how you feel like approaching that genre is different, and how you might tackle that, as opposed to other forms of writing.
It's a great question. Part of the reason I love genre and sci-fi in particular is that it allows you to kind of tell stories without being so on the nose about it. Like like Battlestar Galactica was one of the best things I've watched recently, and it was like a very political show. It was about politics and mass incarceration and occupation and insurgencies, but it wasn't about those things. It was told through this sci-fi lens. So you got to kind of, I heard someone describe sci-fi as like it's a Trojan horse for drama. Like you're telling a cool story with like aliens and explosions or crazy new worlds, but you're really saying something that has meaning and relevance and emotional resonance. So that's why I really love sci-fi. I love the metaphorical ability of it to tell stories that, like, you're telling stories that are that have a message. So like on the 100, we were telling stories about like what leadership looks like when you're kind of facing survival every day. But we get to visit this really interesting kind of messed up dystopian world. So that's the things I really like about it. And then the thing I mentioned before about just being taken to a place I haven't seen before. I can really appreciate a very kitchen sink, well done character drama, but I kind of want to be taken someplace new. So sci-fi kind of lets you do all those things. Yeah.
Oh, we have one right over here.
Is it on? Is there a certain level of writing or production experience you would suggest having before pitching a pilot you wrote, or is it worth just going head on if the opportunity arises?
Yeah, I mean, if someone is interested in if you're in a position to pitch a pilot, then by all means go for it. I mean, it's the kind of thing where now is a really interesting time because new show ideas and pilot ideas are coming in from all over the place. Like I mentioned podcasting before, so it's kind of easier now to kind of get a show picked up than probably at any other time in the TV business, which is really kind of fascinating. Sometimes, in my experience, the industry is a little self-limiting on when that moment comes. Like sometimes it's contractual. So when you're working on staff of a TV show, it's often literally in your contract that you cannot develop, which means you can't pitch new ideas until until year 3 of your deal. So you actually can't do it until a certain point. And then also the industry is more interested in hearing from you with a little bit of time under your belt. So people can pitch at that first possible opportunity. They're more interested they're more likely to actually have people buy those things or listen to them, the kind of higher up you get. Because I'm trying to think what level I was when I started developing. Probably producer, supervising producer. So as time goes on, they're more and more interested in hearing from you. But that's kind of the conventional way. But again, now because people are buying shows based on like Twitter feeds and all kinds of other things, a show can come out of nowhere. So if you're in a position to pitch, there's nothing wrong with trying to do that. I mean, what would probably happen in that scenario is if you are not an experienced TV person, this happens all the time. If you come in from another industry, but you sell a show, they will partner you with somebody who is an experienced showrunner, and then that person will work with you to actually get the show made.
So I know this is different from film, but what is the difference between executive producer and regular producer on television?
Yeah, it's such a slippery term. So like producer, as I was talking about earlier today, can often mean just a writer of a certain level. But producer also means like the line producer. So the line producer is the person who actually figures out how to make the show. So our line producer is based in Toronto. She oversees the office there. She, hires the staff, does the budgeting, making sure everyone gets paid. And so she's, a producer as well. She's not involved in the writing or the creative aspect of it, but she's a producer as well. So on the TV side, it's really the difference between producer and executive producer is, 5 or 6 years of experience. So it's, the rungs are separated by a few things there. But producer also can mean, so confusing. Producer can also mean the person who's in charge of the post team. So that person is the person who is in charge of the editors and the color timers and the sound and all that stuff. So that person is also called a producer. Sometimes people's assistants get to be called a producer. Like it's a really slippery title. So it's important to know the context when that word is used, and that helps define kind of what actually that means.
I think we're way back there in the corner.
Hey, so I know that writing can be at times an intensely frustrating experience. And I was wondering what you do and if you have any tips for overcoming writer's block, like how you deal with that, if there's rituals that you kind of use to get yourself into a mood or a creative state.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about TV is that, especially when you're in production, so usually a writer's room will try to get started some months before you start filming because it takes less time to shoot an episode than it takes to write an episode. So it ends up being kind of this Pac-Man situation where production's catching up with you. So you want to get started and write as many scripts as possible. So once production starts, the scripts need to keep coming. So in TV, often you don't have the luxury of writer's block because you have hard deadlines. So I find personally when I'm responsible to someone else, like I have a deadline, I just don't get writer's block because I can't afford to because I have to turn my thing in 2 days or whatever, or we're shooting in 2 days. But before you get to that point, the other thing that I find helps with writer's blocks is I'm a big believer in outlines. Television is very much an industry that, outlines are often a deliverable. Like I turned an outline yesterday. And so the outline is a really good roadmap for the script. So I find for myself with the outline, the more solid that is, the faster the script writing goes. And it's not like the outline is, you don't need to be a slave to it. There's a lot of invention and discovery and even changes from outline to script. But if you have a solid outline, like it's a map, you know where you're going. And then the writing can go a lot quicker. So you don't get stuck because you have that roadmap to go along with. Now that being said, when I'm working on my own stuff, like I'm working on an original screenplay or a spec pilot, like no one's paying me to do it, I'm just doing it for myself, that can be a little trickier. You just need to be like, because sometimes you just don't feel like it, you're tired, there's like laundry to do, like any excuse to make to procrastinate. And it's discipline. I mean, it's like a muscle like any other muscle. So if you make a practice, and it's different for everybody. Like some people are like, I need to do X pages a day, or I need to do X words a day. Some people need to be that regimented, but whatever that ritual is for you that kind of gets you to do it regularly. And sometimes, writing is not sitting at the keyboard. Sometimes writing is like literally staring into space and figuring out a story problem, or working on your whiteboard, or note cards, or research. But making it a discipline, I think, is really important. And like for me, like I came in from another industry. I was working full time in a tech company. So I only had mornings and evenings and weekends, so that I didn't have all the time. So when your time is compressed, you end up kind of focusing and because I only have an hour and a half, before I need to leave for work to write. I need to get something done, and that for me helped instill that kind of discipline to kind of do it every day. But it's really tricky. I mean, the creative process is different for everybody. Writer's block is very real for a lot of people. I just find for myself, deadlines and external obligations kind of help getting past that.
Kind of to follow up on that, we'll come to Can I ask a question really quick? Okay. To follow up on that a little bit, right now you're writing for season 4 of The Handmaid's Tale. What does a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, it kind of depends on where you are in the process. So we're now working on season 4. So the episode, writing episode 2, we were up until about a week ago, we were all in the room working on the episode, talking about it card by card. Because I'm senior, I can what's called run the room. So I'm the one who's kind of driving the discussion and think, oh, okay, maybe not this or maybe this instead. But everyone's kind of pitching ideas and suggesting directions the story can go. So once that's all done, so that's the day. Like we'll be literally in a room talking, and then someone's taking notes as we talk, and we get the notes every night so we can look at what we said. And then once we kind of know what the scene's going to be, someone writes it on the index card and puts it on the board. And that will be the day. Like we'll break for lunch. We'll have a couple breaks here and there, to check email or whatever. But that's the work day. And once that was done, though, then I went off to write the outline. And because our staff isn't very big, they wanted to keep me in the room a little bit. So I would write in the morning. So I'd be writing the outline. So all those cards that we did, I put them in my office. So I have this in my office now. So I'd be working on the outline, just working on MS Word in my office. And then I would go into the room in the afternoon, basically so I wouldn't get too far behind because they move on. I'm working on episode 2. They're talking about 3 and 4 now. And then that's the day. And then when I'm off writing on script, then I can write at home. I can write in my office because we have offices in LA that are not like an office suite. But yeah, so the day it feels a lot like going to a regular job. It's like going to an office. So for me, coming from a different industry, that felt pretty normal. But people coming over from movies, they're like, what do you mean I have to go to an office? I didn't become a writer to go to an office every day, but that's what TV is like.
Okay, I think we have a question right here.
I know this is more related towards writing, but I wanted to ask you, have you done radio? Because you can talk fast.
I have not done radio. Talking too quickly definitely is something I need to work on. I talk way too fast, yeah.
But my question is, I know this might be related towards writing, but I wanted to ask, is there any room as far as for voiceovers, voice actors, or voice fill-ins, and what type of experience?
It's interesting. On some shows, quite a bit, yeah. Some shows, yeah, the voice acting. I actually don't know. I don't know how voice acting is cast. It might be cast out of LA. I know there's voice acting that happens here in San Francisco. We don't actually have a lot of that. The voiceover we have is done by Elizabeth Moss usually, who plays June. But what we do have are what's called a loop group, and they do the kind of the background noise. Like if it's a scene that's set in a restaurant, when they film the scene, it'll be completely silent except for the actors who have the lines. But then in post-production, you need to add in some of that kind of hubbub of people having a dinner conversation, and there are entire groups of actors that will do that. That's there's loop groups of various kinds, and I think they're in LA. I don't really know, but that always seemed like a really interesting job to me because they're actually having to improvise real conversations. They're just mixed down really low, but it's not peas and carrots. They're actually conversations. But that's the other place that I know voice actors work in the industry. Yeah.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Okay, we're right over here.
Did you have someone that was a role model or a television show that inspired you to become a great writer and producer you are?
First, thank you. I've watched and enjoyed a lot of TV, kind of my whole life. I grew up in the 80s and there was a lot of, I loved it. It was probably terrible, but I watched, Battlestar Galactica, the old one, which the new one was so much better. But yeah, I watched, A-Team and terrible 80s TV shows. But much more recently, I think shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a big one that I just loved that show. In part because the question earlier about sci-fi, it was the show that was smart and about teens, but it was about something else. It really used genre as a metaphor to talk about growing up, like peer pressure and feeling invisible, to show where you could literally become invisible. So Buffy I thought was really an amazing show. Twin Peaks was super trippy, but I really loved that show as well. China Beach was also a show I really loved. That's one that I watched with my parents. I grew up in a military family, so we would kind of watch anything that had a military theme. That was a John Wells show. John Seckert Young show. That was really good. But yeah, I watched a lot of TV growing up. But I didn't know writing for TV was a job really until I was kind of an adult. I mean, I think I knew intellectually that someone had to write this stuff, but the idea that it would be a career that someone could have, it's a very competitive business, but it's a really fun job, and if you can kind of get some stability, it's a good living. But yeah, I've watched pretty much everything I can get my hands on. Again, a lot of sci-fi, a lot of fantasy, all that stuff. Thanks.
I think we have one more question right back there again.
Hello. So going back to the actors, what happens when you cast the actor based on their tapes and it doesn't work out? Like they come in, it's nothing like the tape was. I guess like it's nothing that you expected. It's just not good. Do you end up just having to let them go? Do you try to work with it? Is it just kind of floating there?
Yeah, yeah, that's not a great situation. I mean, it depends on the role. If it's a small role, we'll do the best we can and kind of cut around it. And sometimes sometimes someone will audition well, but they get nervous on the day, which is really too bad. And they could be amazing, but they just kind of choked in the moment. So then you can kind of cut around them. If it's it happily does not happen that often. Really what happens often is the reverse, where someone is so good that we end up kind of doing more with them. There's a character on the show named Rita, and that's a character who has just a few lines here and there, but the actress who played her, Amanda Brugel, who's Canadian, was did so much with the little bit that she had that we end up writing more and more for her. So that happened on the 100 as well. There's a character named John Murphy who was kind of bad guy, but he was so good, and the actor also was lovely. So I mean, the fact that the actor is a pleasant person to work with also it makes the producers and the writers like them more. We just end up writing more for these people, and then the roles end up kind of popping and becoming bigger. So happily that happens more often than the other way.
We're getting short on time, but is there any final thoughts that you want to leave with the students today?
Oh, final thoughts. Yeah. I think persistence is really key. I mean, for those of you who are considering a career in the entertainment industry, it's hard. I mean, when I got my first job, the show got canceled. I mean, that was a bumpy year. I got my first job in TV, I'm gonna be a TV writer. Then there was the writer's strike. So we were on. I walked the picket line, which is an amazing experience, but hard. I didn't work for 3 months doing that. Went back to the show. Show got canceled, and then I didn't work for 7-8 months. I mean, it was kind of rough, and so then you have to ask yourself, well, do I go ask for my old job back, which was something I thought about, or you kind of stick it out? Do you be smart with your savings, which is what I did. So being persistent makes all the difference. I met people in a pilot writing continuing ed class at UCLA Extension. I took it the first year I got to LA. And I'm still friends with most of those people, and all of us who stuck with it. Some people just didn't want to do it. Those of us who all stuck with it, we all kind of moved up together, and now we're all kind of at the same level, and we're recommending each other for jobs. So persistence is really key, and getting feedback from people you can trust is really important. And that's hard as you're kind of earlier in your career because you're you're all learning together. But learning to discern good feedback, learning how to take it. And not let it hurt you personally, because we're writers, we're sensitive, but understanding that comments are it's not personal, it's about the script. Understanding how to take criticism and how to be resilient, and that goes back to the persistence thing, because you get told no a tremendous amount in this business. I mean, actors, directors, writers, you don't get a job, your show gets canceled, your option doesn't get picked up, your pilot doesn't get picked up, your pitch doesn't sell. There's a million ways you get told no. You just have to kind of get back up, dust yourself off, and keep going. And that resilience is really worth its weight in gold.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I know I am extremely excited about season 4 of The Handmaid's Tale coming out soon. I can't wait for that. We are very grateful for you being with us today, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It's such a pleasure being here.